The napkin in my lap was the good linen, the heavy kind, and I kept smoothing it over my thighs, like if I pressed hard enough the fabric might make me smaller. The dress was my best friend's idea. Deep wine-colored, off one shoulder, the sort of thing that looks incredible on the hanger and then reminds you exactly where your body starts and stops the second you sit down. I'd been sitting for 22 minutes. I know because I kept checking the clock behind the bar, a big brass thing shaped like a ship's wheel, and every time the minute hand jumped I felt it in my stomach. He wasn't coming. Whoever he was. The restaurant was up on the 44th floor, one of those places where you can see the whole city sprawled out under the snow. The CN Tower, glowing red and white through the window like a lit match. The streetcars far below, crawling along College like beetles. Everyone around me looked like they'd been born knowing which fork to use. Women with collarbones you could hang a coat on, picking at little towers of beet and goat cheese. And there I was, a baker who smelled faintly of yeast under the perfume Marnie had sprayed on me in the elevator, folding and unfolding a napkin, waiting for a man I'd never met to decide whether I was worth showing up for. I want to be clear that I am not usually this woman. I don't do blind dates. I especially don't do blind dates arranged by my best friend's husband with, and I'm quoting Marnie here, a business guy, old school, very generous, he just needs someone on his arm for events. I'd laughed her right off the phone. And then the letter came. The bakery was my grandmother's. Bee's Bake Shop, on College near Grace, with the cracked tile floor she'd never let me replace, and the ancient deck oven that had been temperamental since before I was born. My grandmother built that place with her hands after she came over with nothing. And when she passed, she left it to me and not my mother. And my mother has never quite forgiven either of us for that. I'd promised Bea on her last afternoon, holding her papery hand, that I would keep the ovens hot. I meant it more than I've ever meant anything. But butter tarts don't cover a commercial mortgage in this city. The rent on the building had gone up 11% in the spring. The big oven needed a new heating element that cost more than my car. And that morning I'd opened an envelope from the bank, thick paper, very polite, informing me I had 90 days before they started proceedings. 90 days to find $18,000 I did not have. So when Marnie called again that afternoon, breathless, I didn't laugh. I said fine. I said just dinner. Is the gentleman still expected, madame? The server had appeared beside me the way they do in places like that, silent, faintly bored. He was young, and he was trying very hard not to look at me with pity, which is somehow worse than pity. He's just running late, I said. The weather. Which was a lie, because it wasn't even snowing hard. He nodded and drifted off, and I looked at the empty chair across from me and thought, this is what desperation looks like. It looks like a woman, in a borrowed dress, lying to a waiter about a man who was never coming. Because men who own things and go to galas do not, in the general course of the universe, show up for a 29-year-old baker, with flour under her nails and a body that takes up its full chair. That's when I heard him. Hello, Odette. I knew the voice before I turned. It has a specific quality, my ex-husband's voice, a kind of oily warmth that used to feel like sunshine, and now feels like the film on top of old soup. He was standing at the end of the table in a gray suit that was a size too big in the shoulders, a wine list tucked under his arm. Grady. Working the floor. Of course. Of course, the one fine dining room in a city of 3 million where I get stood up is the one where my ex-husband has landed a job pouring other people's Barolo. You've got to be kidding me, I said. Small world. He smiled the smile. He looked me up and down slowly, letting it land, and then he did the thing he always did, the thing that ended us, the thing I used to shrink myself over for 4 years of marriage. Wow. Big night out. Somebody let you off the leash from the bakery? He tilted his head. You should have told me you were coming, Odette. I'd have warned the kitchen to double the bread order. A woman at the next table laughed into her wine. Not a big laugh. Just enough. Here is the thing I have learned about being humiliated in public. It doesn't feel loud. It feels very, very quiet, like the whole room has been dipped in water. My face went hot. My hands went to the napkin. And for 1 second, I was 24 again, standing in our kitchen, while he told me the reason he'd cheated was that I'd let myself go, as if I were a house he'd stopped mowing the lawn of. I opened my mouth to say something. I don't know what. And a voice I had never heard before said, very calmly, from just behind Grady, "That's my seat." Everything about the room reorganized itself around those 3 words. The man they belonged to was not large in a loud way. He was large in the way weather is large. Dark suit, no tie. The collar of his white shirt open at the throat, a few days of black stubble along a hard jaw. He looked to be somewhere in his early 40s. He had the stillness of a person who has never once in his life had to hurry, and eyes so dark they read as black under the chandeliers. 2 men in matching charcoal stood a respectful distance behind him, near the host stand, hands folded, watching everything. Grady turned, and I watched the confidence drain out of my ex-husband's face like water out of a cracked glass. "Sir, I was just—" "The table was reserved for me," the man said, "and for her." He didn't raise his voice. That was the frightening part. "You put your hands on my chair, and you spoke to my dinner companion like she works for you." He stepped closer, and Grady, who is not a small man, took a step back. "She doesn't work for you. She never should have married you. Now you're going to apologize to her, and then you're going to walk to the kitchen and tell whoever hired you that you've decided to find work in a different building." "You can't." The man's hand moved, almost gently, and closed around the front of Grady's collar, and he lifted, not high, just enough that my ex-husband came up onto his toes, his heels leaving the floor, his eyes going wide and wet. Somewhere a fork clinked against a plate, and then the whole room was silent. The 2 men by the host stand didn't move a muscle. They'd seen this before, whatever this was. "Apologize," the man said quietly. "I'm sorry," Grady gasped. "Odette, I'm sorry." The man set him down as easily as you'd set down a bag of flour. Grady straightened his jacket with shaking hands, looked at me once, and something in his face I'd waited 4 years to see. Fear, actual fear, on my behalf. And then he was gone through the swinging kitchen door, and I never saw him pour a glass of wine again. The man pulled out the chair across from me. My chair, the empty one, the one I'd been staring at for 22 minutes. He sat down like it had always been his, unfolded his napkin, and looked at me with those dark eyes. "I owe you an apology as well," he said. "I'm late. There was a situation at the port. It couldn't be helped." He signaled the server, not Grady, a different one, who'd materialized looking terrified and thrilled. "We'll start with the burrata. And bring the lady, whatever she was too polite, to order for herself." I found my voice. Barely. You're Marnie's husband's business associate. I'm many people's business associate." A very small smile. "My name is Enzo Castellano, and you are Odette, who owns the little bakery on College with the butter tarts my grandmother would have wept over." He said it without a trace of mockery. He said little bakery the way you'd say something precious. "I've eaten there 3 times. You've never once looked up from the register long enough to notice." I stared at him. "You've been to my bakery?" "Everyone's been to your bakery. That's the point." He leaned back. "The whole neighborhood has anyway. Which is part of what I want to talk to you about. But first, eat something. You've had a terrible evening and it's about to get complicated. And I don't like to negotiate with people who are running on an empty stomach." I should have gotten up. I know I should have. Every sensible instinct my grandmother put in me said, "This man made a grown waiter cry with 3 words. And you don't know what situation at the port means, and there are 2 men by the door watching you like furniture. Get your coat." But I thought about the pink paper letter on my kitchen counter. I thought about $18,000 in 90 days. And I thought about the fact that, for the first time in 4 years, someone had stood up and made Grady apologize to me, instead of the other way around. I stayed. He explained it over the burrata, which was, I will admit, the best thing I'd ever put in my mouth. His businesses were legitimate on paper and complicated underneath. And what he needed was to look like a man who was settling down. Boring. Domestic. Married. The kind of man who has a wife who bakes and a house with a garden. Not the kind of man the newspapers write about, or the police keep a file on. He needed an image, he said, is the one thing you cannot buy from strangers. It has to look real. "I'm proposing an arrangement," he said. "A marriage, on paper and in public. 2 years. During which time your bakery's mortgage is paid in full, your ovens are replaced, your suppliers never chase you again, and your grandmother's shop, belongs to you free and clear for the rest of your life. In exchange, you attend certain events on my arm. You wear a ring. You let the world believe I'm the sort of man who married a baker for love." He said it as plainly as reading a grocery list. And then he took a small box out of his jacket and set it on the white tablecloth between the bread plates and the water glasses and opened it. And inside was a diamond the size of a sugar cube, throwing little pieces of the chandelier all over the table. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "This is insane. You don't even know me." "I know you didn't cry just now," he said. "When your husband, your ex-husband, said what he said, in front of a room full of strangers, you didn't cry. You got angry. You went to say something back. That's rare." He looked at me steadily. "I need someone who can stand next to me when the room gets loud and not come apart. Most people come apart, Odette. You have a spine." And, he added, and I will remember the way he said it for the rest of my life, "I have no interest in a woman built like a coat rack. I never have. Whoever taught you to feel sorry for the space you take up was a fool, and I'd have had words with him, but it seems he's already left the building." The air in that room did something. I felt heat in my face that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "It's strictly business," I said, and I needed to hear myself say it out loud. "Strictly business," he agreed. "I protect your bakery. You protect my image. Nothing you don't consent to. Ever." I looked at the ring. I thought about my grandmother's hands in the dough at 4 a.m, the same motion, 10,000 mornings, building something out of nothing, so that her granddaughter would never have to arrive in a new country with a cardboard suitcase. I thought about losing it to a bank because a heating element cost more than my car. I picked up the ring and put it on. I'd love to tell you it stayed strictly business. It did not, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because this is my actual life and not a story I'm inventing to sound better than I am. We were married 11 days later at City Hall, downtown, in February, both of us in coats, because the heating was doing that thing Toronto municipal buildings do. Marnie was my witness, and cried the whole time, even though she thought it was real, which made it worse, and also, honestly, kind of nice. Enzo's witness was a broad, quiet man named Silas, who I would come to understand was less an employee, and more the older brother Enzo never had. I kept the bakery. That was the deal, and Enzo kept it to the letter. The check cleared the mortgage in a single afternoon. A crew showed up, unannounced the following Tuesday, and replaced the deck oven with a new one. And then, when they saw me touch the old one and go quiet, the formic quietly disconnected the antique and crated it and delivered it to my apartment because, he said, the boss figured you'd want to keep your nana's oven. I did want that. I hadn't told anyone. I sat on my kitchen floor next to that crate and cried for an hour. I started noticing things about my husband that didn't fit the man who'd lifted Grady off the floor. He couldn't cook to save his life, but he'd sit at my counter at midnight while I proofed dough for the morning, asking me about lamination and hydration percentages with the focused seriousness of a man learning a foreign language. He laughed at my jokes. Really laughed. A surprised bark of a laugh, like it caught him off guard every time. He read 3 newspapers a day and did the crossword in pen and got genuinely, boyishly annoyed when he couldn't finish it. And he never, not once, looked at my body like it was a problem to be solved. The first time we were photographed together, at some gala at the museum, a reporter angled to get me from the side, and Enzo stepped between us so smoothly it looked like an accident and said, low, only to me, "You don't hide from anyone. You hear me? They should be so lucky to be in the frame." I have carried those words into every dressing room I have entered since. Somewhere in there it stopped being an arrangement. Neither of us said it. We just started reaching for each other's hands when there was no camera to perform for. Grady came back, of course. Men like Grady always come back. It was a Thursday, near closing, sleeting outside, that gray Toronto slush light that makes the whole city look like a dropped painting. I was cashing out the till when the front door banged open hard enough to rattle the bell, and there he was, soaked through, wild-eyed, and I understood in a single second that something was very wrong with him, that this wasn't about me. "You," he said. "You did this. You and your gangster husband. He got me fired. He got me. Do you know who I owe money to now? Do you have any idea?" He was shaking. He knocked a tray of Nanaimo bars off the counter and they went everywhere. "I need money, Odette. I need it tonight. He can just write a check, can't he, your husband? $12,000. It's nothing to him. Grady, you need to leave. You always were selfish. He came around the counter. Fat and selfish, that's. I hit the button. It was a little thing Enzo had installed under the till without much comment, a plain, gray button, and he'd said, "If you ever feel unsafe, that's all," and I'd thought he was being paranoid. I hit it, and I kept my eyes on Grady, and I said, "The bakery is covered. Every corner. You should think about that." He didn't get the chance to do anything worse. The glass in the front door frosted with cold when it opened, and Silas came through it with 2 other men, and it was over in about 11 seconds, quiet and efficient, and without a single dramatic word. And by the time the uniformed officers arrived, because Enzo, I learned, believed in doing certain things the correct, documented, legal way when the correct way could be made to serve him. Grady was cuffed and sitting on an upturned milk crate among the scattered Nanaimo bars, weeping. Enzo arrived last. He always arrived last. He liked to know the shape of a thing before he walked into it. He crossed the floor straight to me, ignoring my ex-husband entirely, and took my face in both his hands and turned it toward the light, checking me over the way you'd check a child who'd fallen off a bike. "I'm fine," I said. "I used the button. It worked. The button was a contingency." His jaw was tight. "The glass on that door should have been laminated last month. That was my error. I don't make the same error twice." And then, softer, "You're shaking. So are you." He looked surprised, like he hadn't noticed. Then he did something that undid me completely. He crouched down in his $3,000 suit on my flour-dusted floor, and he began picking up the Nanaimo bars, one by one, and setting them back on the tray, carefully, as if they mattered, as if anything about that moment could be made whole again by putting the little squares back where they belonged. "You can't stay here tonight," he said, not looking up. "The door's a crime scene. The neighborhood knows there was a disturbance, and I would rather chew glass than leave you above this shop alone." He stood. "Come home, to my house, where the walls don't break and no one's ex-husband gets through the door." I went home with my husband, and that was the first night that the marriage stopped being on paper in any way at all. The fire happened 3 weeks later, not to the bakery, to the delivery van. The little white cube van with BAs painted on the side in my grandmother's own handwriting, scaled up from a napkin she'd doodled on decades ago. It was parked in the lane behind the shop overnight, and at 4 a.m, someone poured something under it and lit it, and by the time the fire trucks came, there was nothing left but a black skeleton and the smell of burnt sugar and rubber that hung over College Street for 2 days. Enzo told me at his kitchen table, holding both my hands across the wood, his voice very level, which I'd learned meant he was furious. He told me it was a message, that there was another organization, run by a man named Milo Novak, that had decided my husband had gotten soft and distracted. That was the word going around, apparently. Distracted. Since he'd married a baker, and they were testing whether he'd protect what was his or fold. I heard maybe half of it, because one thing had lodged in me and wouldn't move. "Was Hollis in the van?" I said. Enzo blinked. "Who? Hollis?" "My driver. He does the early runs, the hotels, the 2 restaurants on Ossington. On Wednesdays, he sometimes sleeps in the cab between the 4 a.m. drop and the 6 o'clock, because it's not worth going home." "Was he?" My voice cracked. "Enzo, was he? In the van?" My husband looked at me for a long moment, and then he took out his phone and made a call and spoke fast and low, and hung up, and his eyes never left my face. "He wasn't. He'd gone in for coffee. The van was empty. It was only the van, Odette." I put my face in my hands and I cried with relief, and when I could speak I said, "Oh, thank God! Thank God! You just lost your delivery van," Enzo said slowly, like he was working out a problem that didn't have a clean answer. "You lost a week of morning contracts, and you're crying because a man went to get a coffee." "It's a van," I said. "I can buy another van. Hollis has 3 kids and a wife who's a nurse, and they just bought a little place out in Pickering with a mortgage they can barely swing. I can't replace Hollis." I wiped my eyes. "It's just metal, Enzo. It's just paint." He was very quiet. He was looking at me like he'd never seen me before, or like he was seeing something he'd stopped believing existed. "I'm going to end this," he said finally. "I want you to understand that I'm going to end it, and I'm not going to explain how. But I need you to know it wasn't about the van, and it wasn't even about me. It was about frightening you. And no one frightens my wife. Don't get anyone hurt over me, I said. Please, I mean it. I can live without the van. I can't live with people getting hurt so I can sell butter tarts. Something moved across his face that I can only describe as grief. Like it physically pained him that the woman he'd married was made of something he didn't know how to be. He reached across the table and cupped the side of my face, and he said, "You're going to be the ruin of me, Odette. You're going to make me a soft man after all, and I find I don't mind." The gala was 6 weeks after that, in April, at a hotel ballroom downtown, some fundraiser for the Children's Hospital that half the city's money attends to be photographed being generous. Enzo had to be there. Novak would be there too. There was a truce being brokered, delicate as spun sugar, and appearances mattered. I wore a green dress this time, emerald, that Enzo had chosen himself, and that made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, like the most beautiful woman walking into a room instead of the one apologizing for being in it. I saw the waiter before Enzo did. He was carrying a tray of champagne flutes, and the glasses were chattering against each other because his hands were shaking, and there was something horribly familiar about the slope of his shoulders and the twitch of his head. He turned, and I saw sweat on his forehead in a room that was over-air-conditioned, and it was Grady. It couldn't be. He was supposed to be in custody. Break and enter, assault, uttering threats. Enzo had told me the charges had stuck. He shouldn't be out on bail. He shouldn't be here, in a white serving jacket, at a hospital gala, 20 feet from my husband. "Enzo," I said, and my fingers dug into his arm. He was half-turned toward the stage, where a hospital administrator was tapping a microphone. "Enzo, look, the waiter, by the ice sculpture." He turned his head, and the pleasant public face he wore at these things vanished instantly. His whole body changed, not startled, calculating. His arm went around my waist, subtle, a warning to stay close. "Eyes forward," he murmured. "Don't look at him. Stay at my side." But Grady wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the crowd, his eyes darting everywhere, and he didn't look like a man there to hurt anyone. He looked like a cornered animal. He took a step, and then he shouted something I couldn't make out, his voice cracking, and he threw the entire tray of champagne down onto the ballroom floor. The crash silenced everything. "You think you're better than me?" Grady screamed into the sudden hush. "You think money makes you clean? You're all garbage." The room gasped and pulled back. Security began pushing in from the walls, and I felt my husband go completely still and cold beside me. "It's a distraction," Enzo said, and he wasn't looking at Grady anymore. He was scanning the upper level, the balcony, the exits, the catwalk of stage lighting above the crowd. "He's the noise. Someone wants us looking at the noise." His hand tightened on my waist to the point of pain. Silas, 2 o'clock, the lighting rig. Now, I never saw exactly what happened up there. I've been grateful for that. There was a scuffle in the dark above the stage, a shape falling against a curtain, and then Silas's voice in Enzo's earpiece, and Enzo let out a breath, and the terrible stillness went out of his body. Whatever had been meant to happen in that ballroom did not happen. My husband made sure of it. My husband was already 3 moves ahead of it before it started. But Grady, poor stupid Grady, was still standing in the middle of the floor in his white jacket, and now security had him by both arms, and he was staring up at Enzo with an expression I'll never forget. Hope, desperate, sickening hope. "Mr. Castellano," he choked out as they dragged him past. Tell them I did what they asked. I made the scene. I did my part," they said. They said my debt was clear if I... Enzo looked down at the man who had made my 20s smaller, who had called me fat in our own kitchen, who had tried to shake me down among the Nanaimo bars, and who had just now sold whatever was left of himself to a stranger named Novak for $12,000 and the promise of a clean slate. "You threw her away," my husband said quietly. "I found her. Those aren't the same thing, and they never will be. You should have understood that before you took his money." He turned his face away. "Get him out of my sight." I learned later, in pieces over months, what the rest of it was. That Novak had used my ex-husband as a cheap, disposable diversion, betting that Enzo's attention would follow the loud, humiliating thing. His wife's tormentor making a scene. instead of the quiet man in the lighting rig. That it had very nearly worked, and would have worked, on almost any other man, and that the only reason it didn't was that my husband had spent his whole life learning that the loud thing is never the real thing. He hadn't looked at Grady. He'd looked at the ceiling. The truce with Novak did not survive the evening. I don't know the details, and I have made a decision not to want them. What I know is that a few weeks later there was a paragraph in the paper about a man named Milo Novak being arrested at the airport on a very long list of charges, and that Enzo read it at the kitchen table with his crossword and said only, and did not look up, and I decided that was all I needed. We got married again in September, properly this time, in a garden. It was Marnie's idea and Enzo pretended to hate it and then quietly paid for all of it. A rented garden estate up in the Caledon Hills, the maples just starting to turn, that specific gold light Ontario gets for about 2 weeks in the fall before the cold comes down for good. Fairy lights in the trees. My grandmother's recipe for the cake, made by my own 2 hands the night before in the shop. 4 tiers because I refused to let anyone else touch it. Hollis and his 3 kids in the second row, the kids in little clip-on ties, the youngest one already crying because that's what he does at everything. I was halfway down the aisle, on Silas's arm because I have no father who'd have come, and Silas asked me himself, gruffly, the week before, if he could do the walking, and I'd hugged him so hard he'd gone stiff as a board. I was halfway down the aisle, looking at Enzo standing at the little wooden altar in a way that made the whole rest of the world go soft and gray at the edges, when the sound tore across the garden. Tires. Locking hard against asphalt, out beyond the garden wall, in the main drive. Then an engine, revving, aggressive. The reaction was instant and it was terrifying, and it told me more about the life I had married into than anything before it. Enzo didn't flinch, but his hand went inside his jacket. Silas stepped in front of me, all of him, a wall. 2 of the gardeners who had been standing quietly by the hedges came up with something dark in their hands from under the flowers, and the guests gasped, and a ripple of pure animal panic went through the rows of white chairs. My hand went to my stomach without me telling it to, because there was already a reason to protect my stomach by then. A small one, 8 weeks along, that only Enzo and I knew about. Not today, I thought, furious, my heart going like a drum. Please. Not today. Not this. Enzo's eyes left mine for a half a second and snapped to the wall. He raised one hand, holding his men still. A car door slammed. Wait, a voice bellowed from the far side of the gate. Don't shoot. For the love of God, don't shoot. It's me. I'm the best man. I've got the rings. The whole garden let go of its breath at once, and it turned into confusion, and then into the kind of laughter that comes right on the heels of terror, and is half hysteria. Silas touched his ear, listening to the gate, and his enormous shoulders dropped, and he turned to Enzo with the most sheepish expression I have ever seen on a grown man. It's Enzo's cousin, Silas announced, loud enough for the front rows. Car packed it in on the 401, flagged down some poor bastard in a pickup, and made him floor it up the concession road. He shook his head. He's got the rings. He's fine. He's very sorry. Enzo closed his eyes for a moment, and I watched my dangerous, careful, 3 moves ahead, husband dissolve into helpless, shoulder-shaking laughter in front of 200 people, his hand still half inside his jacket, and I started laughing too, and then I was crying and laughing at once, standing in the middle of the aisle in my grandmother's kind of light, and I thought, this is it. This is the whole strange miracle of my life, that I lit up like this instead of breaking. We finished the walk. His cousin arrived pink-faced and breathless with the rings in a crumpled velvet box, and I married the man who'd claimed a chair and told the world it was his, and told a room full of strangers that I should never hide from anyone, and picked Nanaimo bars up off my floor one at a time, because he thought they mattered. Our son came in the spring, in a hospital downtown, in a snowstorm that shut the gardener, and made Enzo threaten to buy the hospital when the parking was full. It was long and it was hard, and there was a stretch in the middle where I said things to my husband I have since apologized for, and he took all of it, whispering to me in Italian, his voice thick, telling me I was the strongest thing on the earth, that I was a warrior, that one more, just one more, Odette, come on, one more. He held my hand so tight. I lost feeling in 3 fingers, and I have never in my life been so grateful for anything. And then the sound in the room changed. A thin, furious, high little cry, the most beautiful noise ever made, and I fell back against the pillow sobbing, and I said, Is he okay? He's perfect, the doctor said. I watched my husband, this man who lifts other men off floors, who ended Milo Novak with a single, who has men with dark things under the flower beds. I watched him stand there while the nurses cleaned our son, and the tears were just running down his face, and he didn't wipe them, didn't hide them, wasn't ashamed of a single one. He looked at that squalling red bundle like it was the last light in the world. They wrapped him and put him in my arms, and he was tiny and outraged and had a tuft of black hair, and when he cracked one eye open for a second, I saw that it was dark. Dark like obsidian, dark like his father's. Hi, I whispered. Hi, little one. Hi. Enzo leaned over the bed, his whole self around the two of us, and reached one trembling finger to our son's cheek, and the baby turned his head toward it, rooting, and Enzo made a sound I'd never heard from him before, something breaking open. A son, he said, and his voice cracked clean in half. Rafael, for my grandfather. We'll call him Rafael Castellano, I said, tasting it, and it sounded strong, and it sounded like a legacy, like a shop on College Street that a woman built out of nothing, so her granddaughter would never have to be small again. I like it, I said, and my husband kissed me. Salt and joy. And outside the snow came down over the whole quiet city, and I held everything I had ever wanted in the crook of one arm, and I have never once, not for one single second since, felt like I was taking up too much space in the world.